There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, like a Tuesday night or a casual question between friends. They were the camouflage of the mundane, and only in retrospect do you see them for what they were. The pivot point, the subtle shift in the tectonic plates of your existence. For me, that moment arrived on the worn, gray fabric of our shared couch, smelling faintly of old books and Julian's laundry detergent, under the dim, buttery glow of a single lamp. He was scrolling through his phone, a familiar silhouette of focused stillness in our quiet living room, the blue light casting an ethereal glow on his face. I was on the other end of the couch, nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold, pretending to read a book on photographic theory, but really, I was just watching him, as I so often did. He was a creature of kinetic energy, a swimmer whose entire being was calibrated for movement and force, so seeing him this quiet, this contained, always felt like witnessing a rare celestial event. The silence stretched, comfortable and familiar, a well-worn blanket we had shared for years. Then, without looking up from his screen, he spoke, and the sound was so casual it was disarming. "Hey, Leo," he said, his thumb still tracing patterns on the glass. Random question. I made a non-committal noise, my heart giving a strange, illogical flutter. His random questions were usually about whether we had any milk left or who was responsible for the mountain of pizza boxes by the door. "What do you like in bed?" The book in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The air in the room seemed to thin, to crystallize. I was sure I had misheard him. It was a phantom sentence, a figment of my own lonely, hopeful imagination. I stared at the side of his head, at the soft, dark hair that curled just over his ear, waiting for the punchline, for him to look up and laugh, to say he was quoting some stupid movie or reading from a ridiculous online quiz. But he didn't. He just kept his eyes on his phone, his expression unreadable, waiting for an answer to a question that had just detonated the carefully constructed piece of my world. My mind raced, a frantic scramble through 1,000 possible meanings. Did he mean what side of the bed I preferred? What kind of pillows? Was he asking for a friend? A girl he was seeing? The logical explanations were there, floating like life rafts in a churning sea of panic. But my heart, that traitorous organ, had already latched onto the most impossible, the most terrifying, the most wonderful interpretation. I finally managed, my voice a dry rasp. He looked up then, and his eyes, usually so bright and clear, were serious. There was no hint of a joke, no teasing glint. There was just an unnerving sincerity. "In bed," he repeated, as if it were the most normal thing in the world to ask your platonic male roommate of 3 years. Like, what makes you feel good? Comfortable. He gestured vaguely with his phone. "I'm just curious." And then he did something that short-circuited every rational thought in my brain. He tapped his phone screen, and the soft glow illuminated a notes app, a blank page with a blinking cursor at the top. He was poised to take notes. He was going to write down my answer. My answer to a question I had never even allowed myself to fully formulate in the privacy of my own mind. A question that was now hanging in the air between us, charged and alive. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It wasn't comfortable. It was a vacuum, pulling at the seams of our friendship, threatening to unravel everything. I could feel the heat rising in my face, a blush that felt like a confession. My carefully guarded secrets, the feelings I had packed away into the deep, dark corners of my heart, were suddenly being summoned into the light by a casual, catastrophic question on a Tuesday night. I was a photographer, a person who lived by observing from a distance, by framing the world and keeping it at a safe remove through a lens. But now, the lens was gone, and I was in the frame, exposed and utterly unprepared for the flash. Julian and I had met during our first week of university, thrown together by a housing algorithm that had a better sense of destiny than either of us did. He had arrived like a summer storm, all bright smiles and boundless energy, his side of the tiny dorm room instantly exploding with swimming trophies, damp towels, and the scent of chlorine. I, on the other hand, had unpacked my life into neat, manageable squares, my books alphabetized, my camera equipment arranged by lens size, my side of the room a quiet study in grayscale against his vibrant chaos. We were an exercise in contrasts. He was the university's star swimmer, a golden boy carved from sunshine and dedication. His life a disciplined rhythm of early morning practices and weekend meets. I was a quiet art student, majoring in photography, a creature of the darkroom and the library, my life measured in shutter speeds and the patient burn of developing chemicals. On paper, it made no sense. In reality, it was the easiest friendship I had ever known. He seemed to find my quietness calming, a port in the constant storm of his own life. He would burst into the room after a grueling practice, drop his gear bag with a thud that shook the floor, and just collapse onto his bed, talking for an hour straight about lap times, the friction of the water, the competitive fire that drove him. I would just listen, maybe sketching in my notebook or cleaning a lens, offering a quiet comment here and there. I was his anchor, and for me, he was the light. He dragged me out of my shell, introduced me to people, insisted I come to parties where I would inevitably end up in a corner, observing, but feeling, for the first time, a part of something. He never pushed me to be more talkative, more outgoing. He simply made space for me to be myself alongside him. Our friendship was a language spoken in comfortable silences, shared pizzas, and the easy rhythm of cohabitation. My feelings for him were a secret I kept with the same meticulous care I gave to my most delicate negatives. They had developed slowly, over time, in the quiet darkroom of my own heart. It wasn't a sudden, blinding flash, but a gradual exposure. It was in the way he'd throw an arm around my shoulders when he was excited about a race. It was in the mornings I'd wake up to find he'd made coffee, remembering exactly how I liked it. It was in the fierce, protective look in his eyes the one time a guy at a party had made a snide comment about my artsy photos. These moments were tiny pinpricks of light, and over the years, they had formed a complete, undeniable image in my mind. I was in love with my best friend. My very straight best friend. I knew he was straight. It wasn't an assumption. It was an established fact, cataloged in a series of bright, cheerful girlfriends who had passed through our lives. There was Sarah from his biology class, Emily from the rowing team, and for a solid year, Chloe, a dancer he had been deeply in love with. I had liked all of them, genuinely. I had listened to him talk about them, offered advice, and felt a quiet, hollow ache in my chest with every story, every shared kiss he recounted. I built walls around my heart, not to keep him out, but to keep myself in. My feelings were my own private exhibition, a gallery no one else would ever be invited to see. The risk of showing him, of even hinting at it, was too great. Our friendship was the foundational structure of my life. I would rather live with the secret ache than risk bringing the whole building down. So we settled into a rhythm after graduation, moving into a 2-bedroom apartment that felt like a palace after our cramped dorm. He got a consulting job that had him traveling frequently, but he kept up with his swimming, training for national trials with a relentless, almost desperate, focus. I started my career as a freelance photographer, turning our 2nd bedroom into a makeshift studio and darkroom. Our lives were separate but intertwined, our apartment the hub we always returned to. The platonic intimacy of our university days deepened. It wasn't unusual for me to come home and find him asleep on the couch, still in his work clothes, his head at an awkward angle. I'd drape a blanket over him, turn off the light, and retreat to my room, my heart doing a familiar, painful twist. It was a friendship that existed on a knife's edge of physical closeness and emotional distance, and I had learned to walk that line with painstaking precision. I knew the rules. I knew the boundaries. They were unspoken but absolute, and they were the only things keeping me safe. The shift began subtly, a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. It started the day Julian failed to qualify. For as long as I had known him, the national trials were his Everest, the singular peak his entire life had been oriented towards. He had trained with a monk-like devotion, sacrificing parties, vacations, and countless hours of sleep. He spoke of it not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. It was the next logical step in the story of Julian, the golden boy. I was shooting a wedding an hour out of town the day of his final qualifying meet. He'd told me not to come, that he'd be too in his head, but he promised to call the second it was over. My phone was silent all afternoon. I drove home with a growing sense of dread knotting in my stomach. When I walked into the apartment, the silence was what hit me first. It wasn't the usual, peaceful quiet of an empty home. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with unspoken disaster. I found him in the living room, sitting on the floor, his back against the couch, staring at the blank television screen. His swim bag was slumped by the door like a fallen soldier. He was still wearing his team warm-ups, but they looked different, like a costume he no longer had the right to wear. He didn't look up when I came in. He didn't have to. I could see the defeat in the slump of his shoulders, in the way the light from the window seemed to avoid him. "Jules," I said softly, my voice feeling like a trespass. He flinched, as if the sound had physically struck him. He slowly turned his head, and the look on his face gutted me. The bright, confident light I knew so well was gone, extinguished. In its place was a vacant, hollowed-out expression I had never seen before. He looked lost, like a child. He had missed the qualifying time by a fraction of a second. A breath, a heartbeat, a lifetime of work erased in an instant of not being quite fast enough. He told me the story in a flat, dead monotone, devoid of the emotion that was so clearly raging just beneath the surface. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just recited the facts, his voice as empty as his eyes. That night, something broke in him. The architecture of his confidence, the scaffolding of his identity, had crumbled, and he didn't know how to stand without it. He stopped sleeping. Or rather, he stopped sleeping in his own bed. I would find him at 3 in the morning in the kitchen, staring into the open refrigerator as if the answer was hidden behind the milk carton. I would find him on the living room floor, doing push-ups until his body trembled with exhaustion. He was a ghost haunting our apartment, his restlessness a palpable energy that seeped under the doors and through the walls. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, bruises left by sleepless nights. He was adrift on a vast, lonely ocean, and he had forgotten how to swim. The ritual began about a week after the failed trial. I was working late in my studio, editing photos from the wedding, the red safe light casting a monastic glow over the room. The door was slightly ajar, as it often was. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft shuffle in the hallway. I assumed it was just Julian on another of his nocturnal wanderings. But then, my door creaked open a little further. He was standing in the threshold, a silhouette against the dim light of the hall. He looked small, uncertain. "Can't sleep," he mumbled, his voice thick. "I know," I said gently, not taking my eyes off the image slowly emerging in the developer tray. "Want some tea?" "No," he said. He was quiet for a long moment. Can I just sit in here for a bit? It's too quiet in my room." My heart stuttered. My studio, my darkroom, was my sanctuary. It was the one place that was exclusively mine, the fortress where I could process my work and my feelings in solitude. He had been in it before, of course, but never like this, never as a refugee from his own mind. "Of course," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't turn on the light. He just slipped inside, closing the door behind him until only a sliver of hallway light cut across the floor. He navigated the familiar clutter of my workspace and sank down onto the small, worn-out armchair I kept in the corner, pulling his knees up to his chest. He didn't speak again. I went back to my work, the gentle slosh of chemicals in the tray the only sound besides the soft rhythm of his breathing. After about 20 minutes, I glanced over. His head had slumped against the back of the chair, and he was asleep. Deeply, truly asleep. I felt a profound, aching tenderness swell in my chest. He felt safe here, with me. I worked for another hour, the red light softening the hard lines of his face, making him look younger, more vulnerable. When I was done, I didn't have the heart to wake him. I gently draped my jacket over him and went to my own room, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, protective warmth. That was the first time. It soon became a pattern. A few nights a week, my door would creak open, and he would appear, a silent supplicant seeking refuge. He would settle into the armchair, and within minutes, the frantic energy would drain out of him, and he would fall asleep. We never spoke of it in the morning. We'd pass each other in the kitchen, making coffee, and it was as if nothing had happened. It was our unspoken secret, a fragile bubble of nocturnal intimacy that disappeared with the morning light. It existed in a space of plausible deniability. He wasn't seeking me out, not really. He was just seeking a place where the ghosts in his head were quieter. My presence was incidental. At least, that's what I told myself. It was easier than confronting the hope that was beginning to take root in the barren soil of my heart. The ritual escalated one cold night in late autumn. The rain was lashing against the windows, and the old building was drafty. He appeared at my door as usual, but this time he was shivering, wrapped in a thin blanket. He looked exhausted, more so than usual. He didn't even make it to the armchair. He just leaned against the doorframe, his eyes half closed. "Leo," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm so tired." "I know, Jules," I said, my heart constricting. "Go lie down." "Can't," he breathed. "My room feels wrong. Like it's not mine anymore." I understood. His room was the room of the swimmer, the champion. It was filled with medals and trophies that now felt like accusations. It was a museum of a life he no longer felt he was living. I looked at him, shivering in my doorway, and a reckless, terrifying thought entered my mind. My room, by contrast, was a neutral space. It was just a room, with books and photos and a bed. You can sleep on my floor, if you want," I heard myself say. The words felt foreign in my mouth. "I have an old sleeping bag." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of the old Julian, a flash of gratitude that was so intense it was like a physical blow. "Really? Yeah. Don't be weird about it," I said, trying to sound casual, as if I offered up my floor space to emotionally devastated friends all the time. So I dug out the old sleeping bag, and he laid it out at the foot of my bed. The simple act of him being there, a sleeping form in the dark of my own room, changed the entire geography of my world. I lay in my bed, rigid, listening to every breath he took, every rustle of the nylon bag. It was an agony and an ecstasy. He was so close, a tangible presence in my most private space, yet he was a universe away. Sleep, for me, became a shallow, fitful thing. I was too aware of him. I was the guardian of his rest, and the responsibility felt sacred and unbearably heavy. I was living in a state of hyper-awareness, every nerve ending firing. The smell of his shampoo, the soft sound of his breathing, the faint warmth I imagined radiating from his body, it all became a part of my nocturnal landscape. This continued for weeks. The armchair in the studio was abandoned. My floor was his new sanctuary. We still didn't talk about it. The morning would come, and he would roll up the sleeping bag, put it in the closet, and we would go about our day. But something was shifting. The barrier of plausible deniability was eroding. He wasn't just escaping his room anymore. He was coming to mine. He was coming to me. The hope I had been trying to suppress was growing, a stubborn weed cracking through concrete. I felt like I was developing a photograph with an infinitely slow exposure. I could see the image beginning to form, faint and ghostly, but I was terrified that any sudden movement, any change in the delicate chemistry of our situation, would blur it, overexpose it, and leave me with nothing but a black, ruined sheet of paper. Then came the night of the couch, the night of the question. He had just gotten back from a week-long work trip. I had missed him with an intensity that surprised me. The apartment had felt too big, too quiet. The ritual had been broken, and I found I couldn't sleep either, my own room feeling empty without his sleeping form on the floor. When he came home, he looked drained, the corporate world grinding him down in a way swimming never had. We ordered takeout and sat on the couch, falling back into our old, easy rhythm. But it felt different now. The space between us on the couch was no longer in neutral territory. It was charged, filled with the memory of the nights he had spent in my room. And it was in that charged space that he asked the question, "What do you like in bed?" My mind, which had been a frantic blur, suddenly went still. All the potential interpretations, the logical deflections, they all fell away. I was left with a single, terrifying clarity. He wasn't asking for a friend. He wasn't quoting a movie. He was looking at me with an earnest, searching expression, his phone held like a shield, but the Notes app was open, and the cursor was blinking, waiting. He was asking me. For him. The silence stretched, and I knew this was a threshold. I could make a joke, deflect, and retreat back to the safety of our old friendship, and in the morning, we would pretend it never happened. Or I could take a step forward, onto ground that was unstable and unknown, and answer him honestly. I took a breath, the air feeling thick and heavy in my lungs. I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the golden boy, not as my straight best friend, but as Julian. The person who sought refuge in my darkroom, who felt safe enough to sleep on my floor, who was looking at me now as if I held the answer to a question he was too afraid to ask himself. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was the truest answer I could give. I had spent so many years burying my desires that I no longer knew what they looked like. I guess warmth. Feeling safe, I risked a little more, a sliver of the truth. Someone's arm around me. Just presence. Not feeling alone. My words hung in the air between us. I watched as his thumb, which had been hovering over the screen, began to move. He typed. Slowly, deliberately. I couldn't see the words, but I could hear the soft taps of his finger on the glass. He was taking notes. He was recording my secret heart. He typed for what felt like an eternity, then he stopped. He locked his phone, placed it face down on the cushion between us, and the blue light vanished, plunging us back into the warm, dim glow of the lamp. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me, his eyes dark and deep. Then he shifted on the couch, a small, deliberate movement. He closed the remaining distance between us. It was only a few inches, but it felt like the crossing of a continent. His knee brushed against mine, and the point of contact was electric, a jolt that went straight through me. He leaned back against the cushions, his shoulder pressing against mine, and then, slowly, tentatively, he laid his head on my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. I forgot how to breathe. His hair was soft against my neck. I could feel the warmth of him, the solid, real weight of him. This was not the accidental, sleepy contact of friends sharing a couch. This was intentional. Every part of it felt deliberate, a direct response to what I had just told him. He was offering me warmth, presence. He was offering himself as a shield against the feeling of being alone. My mind was a deafening roar of panic and wonder. I was a city under siege, my walls crumbling, and I didn't know whether to sound the alarm or throw open the gates. After a long moment, a lifetime, I made a choice. I slowly, carefully, lifted my arm and let it rest around his shoulders, pulling him just a fraction closer. He sighed, a soft, contented sound that seemed to melt into me, and I felt the tension drain out of his body. He was trusting me, and in that moment, under the single dim lamp in our quiet living room, I felt the first, terrifying, beautiful shutter click of a new beginning. The final escalation of the ritual happened a few nights after the conversation on the couch. That night had been a demarcation line. The plausible deniability was gone, shattered by his question and my answer, and his subsequent action. Things were different, though we still didn't have the words for it. The air between us was thick with unspoken things. He still slept on the floor of my room, but now, the distance between my bed and his sleeping bag felt charged, a chasm of meaning. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, so acutely aware of him it was a physical ache. I could feel him, just a few feet below me, and I knew he was awake too. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a presence in itself, a shared space of mutual, unspoken tension. On this particular night, the cold had a real bite to it. An early frost had silvered the windows, and the building's ancient heating system was groaning in protest. I was in bed, huddled under my duvet, when I heard him stir on the floor. A shiver, a rustle of the sleeping bag. "Leo," he whispered into the darkness. His voice was small. "Yeah," I replied, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "It's freezing." I knew what was coming. Or rather, I hoped I knew. It was the next logical step in this strange, terrifying, wonderful dance we were doing. But I couldn't let myself believe it until he said it. My hope was a fragile thing, a house of cards I was terrified to breathe on. There was a long pause. I could hear the sound of his teeth chattering softly. Would it be okay if, he trailed off, and the vulnerability in his voice was a physical thing, a raw nerve exposed in the dark. He couldn't finish the sentence. He was leaving the door open for me to close it, to offer an extra blanket, to preserve the last shred of our platonic safety. This was it. This was the moment of exposure. The photograph was in the developer, and the image was either going to appear clear and true, or it was going to be lost to the darkness forever. I had to choose. "Just get in," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. The silence that followed was absolute. For a terrifying second, I thought I had misread everything, that I had pushed too far, that he would retreat, and the fragile trust we had built would be broken. But then I heard the sound of a zipper, the rustle of the sleeping bag being pushed aside. I felt the dip in the mattress as he sat on the edge of the bed. He hesitated for a moment, a silhouette in the gloom, and then he slipped under the covers beside me. The bed, which had always felt so large and empty, was suddenly the smallest space in the universe. He lay on his side, facing away from me, his body rigid, occupying the barest sliver of the mattress, as if trying to make himself disappear. He was a universe of warmth next to me, and the proximity was overwhelming. I could smell the clean, faint scent of his soap, feel the heat radiating from his back. We lay there for what felt like hours, two statues in the dark, not touching, barely breathing. The tension was a third person in the bed with us. It was excruciating. "This is weird, right?" he finally whispered, his voice muffled by his pillow. No, I lied, because the truth was that it was the least weird, most right thing I had ever felt in my life, and that was too terrifying to admit. "It's just a bed. It's cold." I was offering him an out, a return to the safety of plausible deniability. He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, his voice clearer now. "It's not just a bed." And with that, he turned over. He moved slowly, deliberately, until he was facing me. In the thin moonlight filtering through the window, I could just make out the shape of his face, the dark pools of his eyes. He was so close. I could feel his breath, warm against my cheek. My heart was no longer drumming. It was a frantic, panicked bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This was the point of no return. The space between our faces was inches, but it contained everything. 3 years of friendship, my lifetime of secret longing, his weeks of confusion and grief, the unspoken question that had been hanging between us since that night on the couch. He lifted a hand, his fingers hesitating in the air between us before they came to rest gently on my cheek. His touch was featherlight, questioning. It wasn't a gesture of casual friendship. It was a confession. It was a question. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just looked at him, my entire world narrowed to the feeling of his thumb stroking my skin, the look of profound, terrifying vulnerability in his eyes. "Leo," he breathed, and my name was a prayer. He didn't ask what I liked in bed this time. He didn't need to. He had the notes. He knew I wanted warmth, safety, presence. He knew I didn't want to be alone. His hand on my cheek was all of those things. It was the answer and the question all at once. He searched my eyes, looking for something. Permission, a stop sign, a green light. I gave him the only thing I could, the truth. I leaned into his touch, a fractional movement, a surrender. It was enough. His eyes fluttered closed, and he leaned in, closing the final inch between us. His lips met mine, and the world stopped. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was hesitant. It was soft. It was a question asked in a language we were both just learning. It was tentative and achingly gentle, a discovery. It was the taste of salt and uncertainty and a deep, profound rightness that settled deep in my bones. It was just a quiet press of lips in the dark, but it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door I had thought was permanently locked creaking open. It was the flash going off, capturing the image I had been waiting my whole life to see. The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back just enough to look at me again, his hand still cradling my face. The silence that filled the room now was different. It wasn't tense. It wasn't awkward. It was full. It was a silence of awe, of disbelief. "Okay," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. I couldn't find my voice. I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. It was more than okay. It was everything. A slow smile spread across his face, a real one, the first I had seen in weeks. It was like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. He let out a shaky breath, a laugh that was more air than sound. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cold air. "Good," he said. "That's good." He didn't pull away. He just stayed there, his forehead against mine, his hand on my cheek. And then, he did something that was somehow more intimate than the kiss. He slid his arm around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all, and tucked his head into the curve of my neck. His body, which had been so rigid and tense, finally relaxed against mine. I wrapped my own arms around him, holding him close, my chin resting on the top of his head. He fit against me as if he were made to be there. He was warmth. He was presence. I wasn't alone. And as he drifted off to sleep in my arms, his breathing slow, and even for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I lay awake, holding him, feeling the fragile, terrifying, beautiful weight of a new reality settling around us. The ritual was over. Something new had begun. The morning after was a brutal, cold dawn. I woke up first, a sliver of gray light cutting through the blinds. For a disorienting moment, I was blissfully unaware, cocooned in a profound warmth I wasn't used to. Then memory came rushing back in a tidal wave. Julian. The kiss. His arm was still slung over my waist, his leg tangled with mine. His head was on my chest, his slow, even breaths a comforting weight. For a few perfect, stolen seconds, I allowed myself to just exist in this new reality. I studied the way the light caught the dark strands of his hair, the peaceful, unguarded expression on his sleeping face. It was the most beautiful photograph my mind had ever taken. I felt a surge of hope so powerful it was painful, a physical ache in my chest. This was real. Last night was real. Then he stirred. His eyes fluttered open, blinking in the dim light. He looked at me, and for a fraction of a second, his expression was soft, content. Then awareness dawned, and it was like watching a shutter slam closed. A mask of panic and confusion descended over his face. He scrambled back, pulling away from me so fast he almost fell off the bed. The warmth was gone, and the cold air that rushed into the space between us felt like a judgment. He started, his voice a choked whisper. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at his hands as if he'd never seen them before, as if they were the hands of a stranger who had committed some terrible crime. I have to. I'm late for something. He fled. He didn't just leave the room. He fled it, snatching his clothes from the floor and practically running out the door, not even bothering to close it behind him. I was left alone in my bed, the sheets cold where he had been. The silence he left behind was a ringing, accusing thing. The hope that had soared so high just moments before came crashing down, leaving a wreckage of doubt and humiliation in its wake. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Julian avoided me with a surgical precision. He left for work before I woke up and came home late, long after I had retreated to my room. We were back to being roommates, but the easy, comfortable space we had once shared was now a minefield of unspoken tension. If we passed in the hallway, he would stare at the floor, his face a grim, unreadable mask. He didn't sleep on my floor anymore. He didn't appear at my studio door. The door to his own bedroom, which had been left open for years, was now firmly, unequivocally closed. Each time I walked past it, that closed door felt like a slap in the face. It was a physical manifestation of the wall he had thrown up between us. I was drowning in confusion and hurt. Had I imagined it all? The vulnerability in his eyes? The tenderness of the kiss? The way he had held me, as if I were a lifeline? My mind, the analytical observer, replayed the night over and over, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I misread the situation? Was I just a convenient, warm body on a cold night? A moment of confused, grief-stricken experimentation he now deeply regretted? The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. The fear that I had just been used, that my deepest, most secret feelings had been carelessly played with, was a corrosive acid eating away at me. The hurt was immense, but underneath it, a slow, unfamiliar anger began to burn. Anger at him for his cowardice, for his refusal to even speak to me, and anger at myself, for letting my guard down, for daring to hope. After a week of this silent, agonizing torture, I knew I couldn't go on. The quiet observer in me had to die. I couldn't stand back and frame this pain from a distance. I was in it, covered in it. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. My friendship with him was either already dead, or it was worth fighting for. Hiding in my room, nursing my wounded pride, wasn't going to save it. I waited for him that night. I didn't hide in my studio. I sat on the couch, in the exact spot where he had asked me the question that had started all of this. I left the lamp on, the same buttery light illuminating the space. I just sat there, waiting, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He came in just after 11, looking exhausted. He stopped dead in the doorway when he saw me, like a startled animal. His first instinct was to bolt. I saw it in his eyes, the immediate, panicked urge to turn and retreat to the safety of his closed-door room. "Don't," I said, my voice quiet but firm, stopping him in his tracks. "Don't you dare walk away from me, Julian." He flinched. He slowly closed the apartment door and leaned his back against it, as if he needed the support. He still wouldn't look at me. He was staring at a spot on the floor somewhere to my left. "We need to talk," I said. "There's nothing to talk about," he mumbled, his voice flat. "It was a mistake." I was confused. "I'm sorry. A mistake," I repeated, and the word tasted like poison. The quiet anger I had been nursing flared into a hot, protective fire. "Was it a mistake when you started sleeping in my studio? Was it a mistake when you moved to my floor? Was it a mistake every single night you came to my room because you couldn't stand to be alone in yours? Which part was the mistake, Julian? Tell me. I want to know." He winced at every question, each one a small, direct hit. He finally lifted his head and looked at me, and what I saw wasn't anger or annoyance. It was fear, pure, unadulterated terror. He looked like a man on a cliff edge, terrified of falling and terrified of turning back. "All of it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I shouldn't have. I leaned on you too much. I used you. It wasn't fair to you. I let you," I said, my voice softening slightly. I stood up and took a step towards him. He flinched back against the door. "I let you because I'm in love with you. I have been for years." The confession fell into the space between us, and the silence that followed was deafening. I had done it. I had taken the last, most terrifying photograph and held it up for him to see. The secret I had guarded for so long was finally out, exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light. His face crumpled. It was the only word for it. The careful, stoic mask he had been wearing shattered, and all the grief and confusion and fear he had been holding back came rushing to the surface. "I know," he choked out, and his confession was a mirror of my own. I think I knew." "Then why?" I asked, my voice pleading now. "Why kiss me like that? Why hold me all night, and then just run? Why treat me like a stranger? Like I'm something you're ashamed of?" "Because I am ashamed," he burst out, his voice raw with anguish. He pushed himself off the door and started pacing the small space, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frantic desperation. "Because I don't know what's happening to me, Leo. My whole life, I've had a plan. A straight line. Swimming, job, wife, kids. It was all mapped out. And then I failed. The line broke, and everything I thought I knew about myself started to fall apart." He stopped pacing and faced me, his eyes wild. "And then there was you. You were just there. You were quiet, and you were solid, and you didn't ask anything of me. Being near you was the only thing that made sense. It was the only time the noise in my head stopped. I didn't understand it. I just knew I needed it. I needed you." He took a ragged breath. "That night, when I kissed you, it wasn't a mistake. In that moment, it was the only thing in the world that felt real. It felt right, and that scared the hell out of me. Because it's not part of the plan. You're not part of the plan." And I woke up the next morning, and I didn't recognize myself. The guy who was holding you, who wanted to keep holding you. That's not who I'm supposed to be. His words were a torrent, a confession of a man completely lost at sea. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He wasn't ashamed of me. He was terrified of what his feelings for me meant for his own identity, for the entire story he had told himself about his life. "So you'd rather be miserable and alone, sticking to a plan that's already broken, than even consider a different one?" I asked softly. He stopped, the question hanging in the air. He looked at me, and the fear in his eyes was still there, but now it was warring with something else. A flicker of longing, a desperate hope. "I don't know how," he whispered. "I don't know how to be that person." I closed the remaining distance between us, stepping into his personal space, into the storm of his confusion. This time, he didn't pull away. I reached out, not to kiss him, but to gently take his hand. His fingers were cold, but they curled around mine instantly, his grip tight, desperate. "You don't have to be a different person, Julian," I said, looking directly into his eyes, willing him to believe me. "You just have to be honest. With me. With yourself." I squeezed his hand. "You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to stop running." Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over and tracing paths down his cheeks. He didn't bother to wipe them away. He just stood there, clinging to my hand like a drowning man to a raft, and let himself be seen. The fight went out of him, the tension in his shoulders releasing in a long, shuddering sigh. "I'm tired of running," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so tired. The confrontation in the living room was the storm that cleared the air. After his confession, after the tears, something between us settled. The frantic, panicked energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile calm. We didn't solve everything that night. We didn't suddenly have a label for what we were or a roadmap for where we were going. But we had a foundation. For the first time, we had honesty. We stood there in the hallway for a long time, just holding hands, the silence no longer a weapon or a shield, but a space for healing. Eventually, I led him to the couch, and we sat, not touching, but not far apart either. We just talked. Or rather, he talked, and I listened, just like in the old days. But this time, the subtext was gone. He spoke of the pressure he'd been under his whole life, the identity that had been built for him as much as by him. He spoke of his fear of disappointing his family, his friends, himself. He spoke of the bewildering, terrifying, and undeniable comfort he found with me, a comfort that had slowly, imperceptibly, morphed into something more, something he hadn't been ready to name. It was like watching him piece together the fragments of a shattered mirror, trying to make sense of the new, unfamiliar reflection looking back at him. I didn't push. I didn't offer easy answers. I just gave him the space to be confused, to be scared, to be honest. I gave him what he had once given me, the quiet acceptance to simply be. When he finally ran out of words, a deep exhaustion settled over him. He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in weeks. The storm in them finally passed. "Can we?" he started, then stopped, a faint blush creeping up his neck. He didn't need to finish. I knew what he was asking. It wasn't a request born of desperate need or cold-induced necessity. It was a choice. "Yeah," I said softly. "Let's go to bed." That night, when we lay down in my bed, it was different. There was no hesitation, no rigid tension. He came into my arms as if he belonged there, his body molding against mine in a familiar, comforting way. But this time, it was intentional. It was chosen. There was no pretext of warmth or safety, even though both were present in abundance. This was simply where we both wanted to be. He kissed me, a soft, sure kiss that was not a question, but a statement. It was a promise to stay, a promise to try. He fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing deep and peaceful against my chest. I stayed awake for a while longer, not with the anxious hyper-awareness of before, but with a quiet, profound sense of peace. The image in the darkroom was finally clear. It wasn't blurry or overexposed. It was sharp, and it was beautiful, and it was real. The days that followed were a process of learning a new language, a new way of being together. The grand, dramatic gestures were over. They were replaced by a series of small, quiet intimacies that were, in their own way, far more profound. It was in the way he would now seek out my hand when we watched a movie on the couch. It was in the mornings when I would wake up to find him watching me, a soft, sleepy smile on his face. The door to his bedroom remained open again. The door to mine was often closed, not to shut the world out, but to keep our world in. Our apartment, once a map of our boundaries and distances, became a shared territory, a home in the truest sense of the word. He was still Julian. He was still driven and sometimes chaotic. But the frantic, haunted energy was gone. He started swimming again, not with the desperate, grinding pressure of before, but for the love of it, for the feeling of the water. He was finding his way back to himself, or perhaps finding a new version of himself that had room for this unexpected, wonderful new dimension of his life. And I was still me, still quiet, still an observer. But I was no longer observing from a distance. I was in the frame, a part of the composition. My camera was still my passion, but I found myself wanting to put it down more often, to simply experience the moments rather than just capture them. One Saturday morning, weeks later, I woke to the smell of coffee. I found him in the kitchen, wearing one of my old t-shirts, humming softly to himself as he poured 2 mugs. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the faint dusting of flour on the counter where he'd clearly attempted to make pancakes. The mess was epic, a testament to his usual whirlwind style. A few years ago, the sight would have filled me with a quiet, secret longing. Now, it just filled me with a deep, uncomplicated happiness. He looked up when I came in, and his face broke into that brilliant, open smile that I had fallen in love with all those years ago. It was a smile that no longer held any shadows, any fear. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and easy. He held out a mug to me. I remembered how you like it. I took the mug, our fingers brushing. The simple touch was a quiet reassurance, a confirmation of this new, beautiful normal we had built. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. A cup of coffee, a shared smile in a sunlit kitchen. They don't announce themselves as the destination, as the happy ending. They are simply moments of peace, of rightness. They are the quiet, steady heartbeats of a life shared. We had navigated the storm, we had crossed the threshold, and we had found our way out of the darkness. And here, in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we were finally home.